The tranquil night was disrupted by the wail of sirens cutting through the still air. Bright, flashing lights painted the otherwise quiet neighborhood in hues of red and blue. The once serene cul-de-sac had become a scene of hushed chaos as neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering anxiously. "They've never had trouble before," muttered an elderly man in his slippers. "What could have happened?" A woman clutched her robe tighter. "It's the Miller's house," she whispered. "I saw officers go in there." Air grew heavier with every passing second, tension thickening as the murmurs swirled. The pristine lawn and flower beds surrounding the house seemed almost grotesque under the emergency lights, a stark contrast to the unfolding tragedy. The interior of the house bore signs of chaos. The kitchen was smeared with dark streaks across the floor, hinting at violence that had erupted in what was once a sanctuary. Shards of glass glistened under the dim light, and an overturned chair lay near a pool of crimson. Every corner seemed to tell its own sinister story, from the jagged edges of a shattered plate to the trail of smeared footprints leading out of the room. The air inside was thick with the metallic tang of blood, broken only by the shuffle of heavy boots and clipped instructions exchanged in whispers. Each detail painted a haunting image of the struggle that had taken place, leaving an unspoken question hanging heavily in the air. Why? A young girl, no older than 7, was gently led from the house by a uniformed officer. Her trembling hands clutched a well-loved stuffed bear, its ear worn from years of comfort. Tears streaked her cheeks, but her expression was one of quiet shock, her lips trembling as if searching for words. She stopped at the edge of the lawn, her voice barely audible. Emily Carter sat in the cramped corner of her college library, her laptop humming faintly as she typed out an overdue essay. Her face betrayed exhaustion, not just from the demands of her coursework, but from the weight of a life spent longing for connection. The glow from the screen cast shadows that accentuated her hollow cheeks. At 22, Emily had mastered the art of appearing fine. She smiled at professors, exchanged pleasantries with classmates, and kept her head down. But behind closed doors, she battled a familiar emptiness. Neglected by her parents as a child, and bounced from one temporary home to another, she had never truly felt wanted. Babysitting for the Millers had offered her a reprieve, a glimpse into the life she had always yearned for. Caring for 7-year-old Lily Miller filled a void she didn't fully understand. For once she felt needed, even loved. But cracks in her perfect facade were starting to show. At night, as she scrolled through social media, envy clawed at her. Friends flaunted vacations, engagements, and family dinners. Emily's life felt small in comparison, a fragile house of cards teetering on collapse. To outsiders, the Millers seemed like the quintessential suburban family. Sarah Miller was a successful marketing executive with an enviable wardrobe and a picture-perfect smile, but to Emily, Sarah's polished exterior masked something colder. Sarah rarely spared more than a few words for her, always preoccupied with work calls or deadlines. Robert Miller, on the other hand, was magnetic. With his easy charm and ready laugh, he was the kind of man who turned heads. Emily often found herself studying him, her gaze lingering a second too long as he joked about Lily's latest antics or asked about her college classes. And then there was Lily, sweet, curious Lily with her wide eyes and endless questions. She adored Emily, clinging to her side during bedtime stories or tugging her hand toward the playground. In Lily, Emily saw a reflection of herself, a child desperate for love and stability. But beneath the surface of their idyllic home, tension simmered. Emily noticed how Sarah's laughter felt forced when Robert was around, or how he stayed late at the office more often than not. The cracks were there, growing wider by the day. Emily had become more than just a babysitter. She knew Lily's bedtime routine better than her parents did, prepared her favorite meals, and comforted her after nightmares. Slowly but surely, Emily began to see herself as indispensable. But there was an unspoken boundary she could feel but never articulate. No matter how much Lily adored her, or how often Robert thanked her with a warm smile, there was a divide she couldn't cross. It gnawed at her, the feeling of always being on the outside looking in. "You're wasting your time with them," Chloe sneered, popping a piece of gum as she leaned against Emily's car. "You'll never be more than the hired help, no matter how many bedtime stories you read." Chloe had been Emily's friend since freshman year, though friend might have been too generous a term. Sharp-tongued and unapologetic, Chloe thrived on stirring the pot. She delighted in pointing out the flaws in Emily's life, always under the guise of honesty. "They'll drop you the second they're bored." "People like that, they don't care about us," Chloe said, her voice dripping with disdain. Emily frowned, shifting uncomfortably. "It's not like that with Lily. She needs me." Chloe's laugh was hollow. "Lily might, but her parents? Trust me, they'll chew you up and spit you out. Don't say I didn't warn you." The words lingered long after Chloe left, planting seeds of doubt that Emily couldn't shake. It was late one evening when Emily overheard them. The muffled voices of Sarah and Robert drifted down the hallway, sharp and biting. "Do you think I don't notice? The late nights, the excuses." Sarah's voice was brittle, edged with fury. "Don't start this again," Robert shot back, exasperated. "You're paranoid." Emily froze, clutching Lily's pajamas in her hands. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the tension was magnetic, impossible to ignore. Later, when Robert passed her in the hallway, his smile was strained. "Rough night," he said with a wink, his hand brushing her shoulder. The touch lingered a beat too long, leaving Emily's heart pounding in her chest. The more time Emily spent in the Millers' home, the more bitter she became. Sarah's clipped instructions and dismissive attitude made her feel invisible. "She doesn't deserve that life," Chloe had said one evening over drinks. "She's ungrateful. You're the one holding that family together." Emily swirled her glass, staring at the amber liquid. "Sometimes it feels like I'm the only one who cares about Lily." Chloe smirked. "Exactly. So why let them treat you like you're disposable? You're worth more than that." It was a dangerous thought, but once planted, it took root. Robert's charm had always been intoxicating, but lately it felt different. The way he looked at her during dinner, or how he lingered in the kitchen when she was alone. "You're doing such a great job with Lily," he said one evening, his voice low. "She's lucky to have you." Emily's cheeks flushed. "Thank you. That means a lot." His smile held something unspoken, something Emily wasn't sure how to interpret, but it made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. "You're the help, Emily, not part of the family," Sarah snapped one afternoon, when Emily suggested taking Lily to the park. The words cut deeper than Sarah could have known. Emily's chest tightened as she fought back tears, biting the inside of her cheek. That night, as she tucked Lily into bed, the little girl clung to her hand. "Will you always stay with me, Emily?" Her voice wavered as she whispered, "I'll always be here for you, Lily." But deep down, Emily knew that promise wasn't hers to keep. The clock struck midnight as Emily stood in the hallway, frozen by the voices rising from the living room. "I know what you've been doing," Sarah hissed, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Late nights, the excuses. Don't insult me, Robert." Robert's voice, smooth but tinged with frustration, answered back. "You're paranoid, Sarah. There's nothing going on. Don't lie to me. Do you think I don't see how she looks at you?" Sarah's voice cracked, her accusation echoing in the silence that followed. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "She? I don't know what you're talking about, Robert said, exasperation heavy in his tone. Emily? She's just the babysitter. The words stung, though Emily wasn't sure why. She stepped back into the shadows, her mind racing. Had Sarah really thought? And Robert's denial. It felt like a betrayal she couldn't fully explain. You heard her say that? Chloe leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and something darker. Emily nodded, her fingers wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. She thinks there's something going on between us. It's absurd, Chloe smirked, leaning back in her chair. Absurd? Is it though? He's always so attentive, isn't he? Emily frowned, the suggestion unsettling. He's just nice, that's all. Nice? Chloe tilted her head, her voice dripping with mockery. He doesn't look at Sarah that way. Maybe he does care about you. Maybe you're not just the babysitter. The words hung in the air, their weight sinking into Emily's thoughts. You deserve better than the way she treats you, Chloe continued, her tone softening. They don't appreciate you, Emily. Not like Robert does. Emily swallowed hard, her thoughts spiraling. Maybe Chloe was right. Maybe she wasn't just a hired hand. Emily stood in Lily's room, brushing strands of hair from the little girl's face as she slept. The steady rise and fall of Lily's chest brought a rare sense of peace, but it was fleeting. That was the last thing Lily awoke to as the sun rose, and the argument between Sarah and Robert replayed in her mind. Guilt gnawed at her. Why should I care what he thinks of me, she asked herself, but the answer lingered, unspoken. She wanted to belong, not just to Lily, but to this family. Later, as she sat at the kitchen table, she caught herself watching Robert more intently, the way he laughed, the subtle charm in his voice. It felt personal. She imagined him seeing her, truly noticing her, and the thought made her pulse quicken. But the guilt returned, heavier this time. She wasn't like that. She wasn't the kind of person who would kill for the sake of killing's sake. She took a deep breath, her hands held out to the sides, and began the slow self-examination. Her phone buzzed, a message from Chloe. You deserve more. Emily stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The next evening, Robert lingered in the kitchen as Emily cleaned up after dinner. You're a lifesaver, you know that? He said, leaning against the counter. Emily glanced up, her cheeks warming. I just try to help. Nifret worked herself into it. You do more than that. His voice softened, and his gaze lingered on hers. We're lucky to have you. She looked away, her heart racing. The words felt different this time, heavier, as if they meant more. From that night on, their interactions carried an unspoken tension. A touch on her shoulder that lingered too long. A glance across the room that held too much meaning. Emily began to convince herself that Robert felt the same, that he saw her as more than just an employee. She wanted him to tell her more, and more often. Emily, can I speak with you? Sarah's voice was sharp, and Emily's stomach churned. They stood in the living room, with Lily coloring quietly on the floor. Sarah's arms were crossed, her expression cold. I want you to say something. I've noticed you've been overstepping, Sarah began, her words cutting through the air. You're getting too involved. It's not your place. Emily's breath hitched. I'm just trying to help. Lily is my daughter, Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. You're just the babysitter. Know your place. Lily looked up, her innocent eyes filled with confusion. Mommy, why are you yelling at Emily? The child's question twisted the knife already lodged in Emily's chest. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she swallowed them down, nodding silently as Sarah dismissed her with a glare. Sarah said, Grab your belongings. The words echoed in Emily's mind that night. "You're just the babysitter." She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning into darker territory. Sarah's coldness, her accusations, her constant dismissal. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that the rest of the colony should so easily be captured, and that the gods leave plenty blessed them. The next day, every small action by Sarah felt like an attack, a sharp tone, a dismissive glance. Emily began to see malice in every interaction, whether it was real or imagined. In her mind, Sarah wasn't just unkind. She was the enemy. Someone who didn't deserve Lily. Someone who was pushing her out. "I'm the only one who cares about her," Emily whispered to herself. The thought brought a strange comfort, a sense of purpose that Sarah had tried to strip away. Emily's resentment festered, growing into something darker. Chloe's words played on repeat in her mind. "They'll never see you as one of them," Chloe had said. "But you could be." It wasn't fair. Sarah didn't deserve Robert's affection, or Lily's love. She didn't deserve the life she had. But she did deserve her children, and the life in which she could build her legacy. Sitting in her car outside the Miller home one evening, Emily let her thoughts wander to places they never had before. What if Sarah wasn't in the picture? The idea sent a shiver down her spine. But it didn't leave. Instead, it lingered, growing stronger with each passing day. And Emily began to wonder, what would it take to protect Lily? Emily scrolled through the messages on Chloe's phone, her chest tightening with every word. Chloe's conversations revealed a vindictive streak Emily had never suspected, discussing the Millers with a venom that stung. She had hated the Millers, and she would repay that. She hated the Millers. "She's so predictable," one message read. "It's only a matter of time before she breaks." Emily's breath quickened. The realization struck her like a physical blow. Chloe had manipulated her all along, using her insecurities to push her toward a breaking point. "You're just a pawn, Emily," Chloe said when confronted, her voice cold and unrepentant. "They deserve this, and you're the perfect tool." The betrayal shattered Emily's fragile trust, her emotions spiraling into anger and heartbreak. Chloe's twisted plan unraveled everything she thought she knew. Sarah's voice was sharp, her words deliberate and cutting. "You've overstepped, Emily. This isn't your place." Emily tried to explain, to defend herself, but Sarah's patience had worn thin. "You don't belong here," Sarah said, her tone laced with finality. "You're fired. Stay away from my family." The rejection left Emily hollow, the emotional blow stripping her of the stability she had clung to. The one place she had felt needed was gone, and with it, her sense of purpose. Alone in her apartment, Emily replayed Sarah's words in her mind. "You don't belong here." The phrase echoed relentlessly, each repetition deepening her despair. Her thoughts turned darker, fueled by the discovery of Chloe's betrayal and the sting of Sarah's dismissal. Emily's connection to Lily became an obsession, her belief that she was the only one who truly cared for the child twisting into something dangerous. "She needs me," Emily whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "I'm the only one who can protect her." Man! The line between reality and delusion blurred as Emily's fractured psyche pushed her toward an unthinkable decision. The decision felt inevitable. Emily's delusions convinced her that she was saving Lily, protecting her from a neglectful mother who didn't deserve her. Emily herself confessed to believing the same of her own children. The darkness outside mirrored the storm within as Emily made her way to the Miller house, her thoughts consumed by the idea of rescuing Lily. Every step brought her closer to a confrontation she could no longer avoid. Emily's confrontation with Sarah was tense, their emotions clashing in a volatile mix of anger and desperation. "You don't understand," Emily cried, her voice breaking. "I'm trying to save her." A faint smile revealed teeth in the dark hour, and was lost. "She's my daughter." Sarah's reply was fierce, her protective instincts driving her to stand her ground. The struggle escalated, emotions spiraling out of control until violence erupted. Emily's delusional rage culminated in a tragic and irreversible act, the aftermath staining everything she had tried to hold on to. Robert's reaction to the scene was calculated, his expression shifting from shock to control. "I'd made the decision to move in with my dad by the time I was 16. This wasn't your fault," he said, his voice calm yet firm. "Chloe pushed you into this." Emily, overwhelmed and vulnerable, latched on to his words, unable to process the reality of what had just happened. Robert's actions were deliberate, his manipulative nature taking charge. He fabricated a narrative that painted Chloe as the mastermind, shifting the blame away from himself and his fractured family. "You didn't mean for this to happen," he told Emily, his tone reassuring. "We'll fix it." As Robert called the authorities, his demeanor remained composed, masking his true intentions. Emily, lost in the chaos of her emotions, clung to the hope that Robert's plan would make things right. But beneath his calm exterior, Robert's motivations were far from altruistic, ensuring that the tragedy served his agenda while leaving Emily to face the consequences. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement as the sound of car doors slamming filled the tense silence. Officers moved swiftly through the front door of the Miller home, their steps faltering as they took in the grisly scene. Emily sat slumped on the floor, her hands stained with Sarah's blood. Her gaze was vacant, fixed on Lily's empty bed. In her trembling hands, she clutched the stuffed bear Lily had left behind. Valander sat down next to the bear and lifted her shoulder. He admitted the bear plenty of times in the past 3 weeks. "She needed me," Emily murmured, her voice barely audible. "I had to save her." An officer cautiously approached, his voice steady. "Ma'am, put the bear down. We need you to come with us." Emily looked up, confusion clouding her face. "Where's Lily?" she asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was protecting her." As they pulled her to her feet, her sobs grew louder. "You don't understand. She was in danger." The weight of what she had done began to settle, her fragile psyche fracturing under the strain. By the time she was escorted to the waiting cruiser, her screams echoed through the neighborhood. At the press conference, Robert stood before a sea of reporters, his face a mask of grief and disbelief. He clutched a tissue in one hand, pausing occasionally to dab at his eyes. "This has been a nightmare for our family," he began, his voice breaking. Emily was troubled. She misunderstood everything. His carefully chosen words painted him as a victim of circumstance. "We trusted her to care for Lily, to be part of our lives, but we had no idea how deeply unstable she was." A journalist called out, "Mr. Miller, did you notice any signs of her instability before this incident?" Robert shook his head, his expression pained. "She hid it well. We had no reason to suspect she was capable of this." The public sympathy shifted toward him, his polished demeanor masking the calculated moves he'd made to deflect suspicion from himself. Across town, Chloe was being questioned by detectives, her usually confident facade cracking under the pressure. "She's lying," Chloe snapped, her tone defensive. "I had nothing to do with this." Except one of the detectives leaned forward. "You manipulated her, didn't you? Fed her insecurities, made her believe she was part of the family." Chloe scoffed, but her darting eyes betrayed her. "I didn't tell her to kill anyone. She did that on her own." Down the alley, She left a few hours later than the first time she'd fled the fairy town to retrieve the map pin. Though her involvement was undeniable, the lack of direct evidence spared her from legal consequences. However, the court of public opinion was less forgiving. Speculation swirled, with many blaming Chloe for fanning the flames that ultimately led to the tragedy. News anchors delivered updates with somber tones, their faces etched with practiced concern. Tonight, we dive into the chilling story of Emily Carter, the babysitter accused of murdering Sarah Miller, one anchor announced. What drove this young woman to commit such a heinous act? Tabloids splashed headlines across their covers. A babysitter's betrayal and tragic consequences of a broken mind. Debates erupted on talk shows and social media. Was Emily a victim of manipulation, or was she a cold-blooded killer? The narrative of betrayal, mental instability, and toxic relationships captivated the public, turning the tragedy into a nationwide spectacle. Amid the chaos, Lily was taken into protective custody. The bright, curious girl who once drew flowers in crayon now sat silently in a sterile office, clutching the same bear Emily had held during her arrest. "She's been through so much," a social worker whispered to a colleague, her voice heavy with sympathy. Lily's future hung in limbo. With no immediate family to take her in, she faced an uncertain path through the foster system. The weight of the trauma was evident in her vacant stare and the way she flinched at sudden movements. The tragedy that had upended her life left scars that would linger for years, raising haunting questions about who would guide her through the darkness. As the dust began to settle, the story's chilling themes lingered in the minds of those who followed it. Was Emily's descent into violence the result of her own choices, or the manipulation of those around her? How much blame lay with Chloe, whose toxic influence stoked the flames of Emily's instability? And what of Robert, who skillfully distanced himself from the chaos, leaving questions of his own culpability unanswered? The tragedy left no clear answers, only a sense of loss and unease. The closing words of the story captured its haunting essence. Avenge. In her pursuit of love and belonging, Emily lost everything, including herself. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor's words echoed, each one hammering at the fragile image of Emily Carter. She sat at the defendant's table, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her, trembling hands clutching a pen she had no intention of using. Emily trusted people who failed her at every turn, the defense attorney began, rising to address the jury. Chloe fed her insecurities. Robert manipulated her vulnerability. And Sarah rejected her humanity. Chloe's betrayal had been the first crack in the foundation. Her words, casually cruel, yet cloaked in false friendship, pushed Emily towards self-destruction. "They'll never see you as more than a tool," Chloe had said, a smirk tugging at her lips. Too late to remedy that, or to reinstate the shadow of generosity. Robert's charm was next, a warmth that felt genuine but was laced with subtle exploitation. His compliments, his lingering glances, they built Emily up just enough to let her crumble when reality intruded. And Sarah's cold dismissal had been the final blow. "You're nothing to us," Sarah had spat, her voice devoid of warmth. Those words cemented Emily's isolation, leaving her adrift in a storm of confusion and anger. The courtroom murmured as the defense paused, the weight of the betrayal laid bare for all to see. As the defense continued, the focus shifted to Emily's fractured past. Raised in a home devoid of love, she had spent years chasing the warmth and security others took for granted. She was a lonely soul in search of connection. The attorney explained, his voice tinged with empathy. Her actions, however tragic, stem from a desperation to belong. Probably a sniper, Emily's life had been a series of closed doors and broken promises. Her parents, distracted and indifferent, had left her to fend for herself emotionally. School had been no better. Classmates viewed her as an outsider, someone who didn't quite fit. People dismissed her criticisms as if they had no new interest in. When Emily began babysitting for the Millers, she had finally glimpsed the life she yearned for. Lily's adoration and Robert's kindness felt like acceptance. For the first time, she thought she had a place where she mattered. But her longing became a double-edged sword. As the cracks in the Miller family grew, so did her sense of inadequacy. The more she tried to insert herself into their lives, the more they pushed her away. Was she a victim of circumstance? The attorney asked, his gaze sweeping across the jury. Or did her need for connection blind her to the damage she caused? The question lingered, unanswered but heavy with implication. The prosecutor shifted in her seat, leaning forward as she addressed the courtroom. While Emily's vulnerability is undeniable, we must not ignore the role Chloe played in steering her toward the brink. Chloe's manipulation was subtle, calculated. She had known exactly how to play on Emily's insecurities, weaving a narrative that framed the Millers as the enemy. "They don't care about you," Chloe had whispered, her words as venomous as they were deliberate. The defense countered with the suggestion that Chloe's vendetta was personal, driven by her own grievances against the Millers. But there was no denying that her actions had set a chain of events into motion. Chloe had planted the seeds of resentment, watering them with doubt and jealousy until Emily's fragile mind could no longer distinguish reality from delusion. The courtroom settled into an uneasy silence as the prosecutor's closing remarks hung in the air. What unfolded between Emily, Chloe, and the Millers was more than a tragedy. It was a chilling reminder of how easily trust can be twisted into a weapon. This chapter of Emily's life, filled with longing, betrayal, and manipulation, was one piece of a larger, haunting puzzle. The weight of those choices would ripple far beyond the courtroom, leaving scars that no verdict could heal.